This is my review of The Batman 2022 starring Robert Pattinson. But before I get into the review, I first want to give you some context. Now, I grew up in the 1980s watching the old Batman TV series starring Adam West. And that series, I think, was from the 1960s. So even as a kid in the 80s, the Adam West TV series was very dated to us. And that was part of why it was entertaining, because it was so dated and the special effects were so poor and so cheesy. The costumes and everything just looked terrible, but it was still enjoyable, partly because of the fact it was so dated and terrible. And it was all shot, I think, on one soundstage, like every episode, and every episode pretty much went the same way. And they had the whole thing just shot in one room. And yeah, so that was my early memories. And of course, watching the Batman cartoons as well. We did watch those. And back in the 80s, there was also cassette tapes. It was almost like an audio comic. We used to listen to like Spider-Man and Batman audio comics on cassette tape. So that was my experience of Batman. I might have seen a few bits and pieces of the old Batman films that came out in the 40s and I think the 60s. I think one of them had Eartha Kitt in it as Catwoman, but I was never really into those. It was all black and white and far too old. Even though I'm old myself, it was too old for me at the time growing up in the 80s as a kid. But then in 1989, they brought out a new Batman film starring Michael Keaton, directed by Tim Burton, also co-starring Jack Nicholson. It had, was it Kim Basinger that played Vicky Vale? Wasn't Michelle? No, Michelle Pfeiffer was in the sequel. She played Catwoman. I think it was Kim Basinger that played Vicky Vale. But going into that film, you have to understand that Batman was really seen as a kid's thing. It had lost its way and adults weren't interested in Batman at that stage, by that point. Perhaps there was some comic book nerd somewhere or something that was still into it. But in terms of the adult audience, nobody was paying attention to Batman. But when they brought out the 1989 new Batman film with an A-list cast, so you have to understand, Jack Nicholson was a Hollywood heavyweight at this point. Kim Basinger was a Hollywood heavyweight. Michael Keaton, maybe not so much, but he had been in Beetlejuice, which was, I guess, a popular film. I certainly watched it we enjoyed it as kids, Beetlejuice. So this was a film directed by Tim Burton, which they threw a lot of money at, and they tried to basically reinvent the Batman franchise and the Batman character on screen. And it worked very, very well for the time. I remember going to the cinema and watching that film, and I was mightily impressed because the budget was big, all-star cast. Jack Nicholson put in a good performance as the Joker, and Michael Keaton was good as Batman too. And of course, there was a lot of fanfare, and it was on the news and the posters everywhere, and everybody was talking about it. And they were talking about the Batmobile because the Batmobile was so cool, like it was nothing like the Batmobile that you saw in the Adam West TV series. This Batmobile, they spent money on it. So I was very impressed by that film. In retrospect, if you watch it now, or if I watch it now, it's very cheesy and camp. But we'll come on to that in a second when it comes to the sequels. But it's pretty cheesy and camp. But Jack Nicholson's performance, I guess, still holds up. Michael Keaton's performance is still, it's all right. And it's a typical Tim Burton style film. How would you describe Tim Burton's style as a director? It's gothic, but also a bit camp. You know what I mean? That's what Tim Burton films are like. This gothic, camp, cartoony. It's hard to describe what they're like. And they usually, of course, these days have got his wife in nearly every single Tim Burton film. But anyway, the sequel came out, which was Batman Returns. And that's the one that had Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. And of course, she was another Hollywood heavyweight. Everybody remembers her from Scarface, where she played Scarface's Tony Montana's feisty girlfriend that he stole off Lopez. And yeah, I don't remember as much about the sequel as I do about the first film. I just remember thinking the first film was better because of Jack Nicholson. The second film, I think, had Christopher Walken in it, which again, if you're judging by today's standards, that's a bizarre casting choice, right? Christopher Walken is a good actor in his own right. He's weird. Perhaps he suited that Batman film. I'd have to go back and watch it again. But it's weird considering the way Batman films have gone today. You wouldn't put someone as quirky and strange as Christopher Walken in a Batman film necessarily these days, right? But back then, they put him in it. And Danny DeVito played the Penguin. Okay? But then Tim Burton left the series, and the next two films were absolutely appalling. I mean, they were shockingly bad. So the next film was directed by a guy called Joel Schumacher. That film was called Batman Forever. And after Batman Forever was Batman and Robin. Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, I mean, they just blur into one for me. But, you know, they had Arnold Schwarzenegger. Imagine putting Arnold Schwarzenegger in a Batman film. Unbelievable. He played Mr. Freeze. And he was, complete with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Freeze. And he had all the cheesy lines and everything like that. The Schumacher directed Batman films were absolutely atrocious. And oh my gosh, I forgot to even mention, Batman Forever had Val Kilmer as Batman. So that was Val Kilmer's not a bad actor, but he wasn't as good as the previous Batman. And then after Val Kilmer, because he didn't even like being in that film, he didn't like the way the film turned out. After Val Kilmer, they replaced him with George Clooney in Batman and Robin. I mean, unbelievable. Talk about sacrilege. They were absolutely mugging off the franchise by that point with Arnold Schwarzenegger and George Clooney. And oh my gosh, it just turned into an absolute you-know-what show. You know, got to be careful on YouTube, demonetize even the slightest bit of profanity. So, those awful films happened, and that really killed off Batman for a long time because we were moving well into the 90s, and all that cheese was kind of fading out because the 80s, for those of you who weren't around in the 80s, it was a very cheesy decade. That's the best way to describe the 80s. It was cheese, tacky and cheesy, but great. I love the 80s. I love the 80s a lot more than I love the 90s, and the 90s was a good decade. But the 80s was just magic. It was like lino floors and horrendous interior design and how everyone's house looked ugly as hell. Terrible carpets and furniture. Everything just looked horrendous. Did shell suits come out in the 80s or the 90s? I think they came out in the 80s. I'm pretty sure it was the 80s. Just horrible dress sense, mustaches, mullets. I mean, the 80s was pure cheese, but it was magic. That's the best way to describe the 1980s. The 1980s was a magical decade, and there were some great films that came out in that decade. But anyway, going into the 1990s, certainly by the midway into the 1990s, that was the cool decade. Everybody was too cool for school. And so Batman had really turned into something that was seen as very, very dated and cheesy, and it wasn't keeping up with modern times the way society was going. Everybody's being cool now. So yeah, that was that for Batman for a long time until Christopher Nolan came out with Batman Begins. That must have been around, 2007, 2006, 2007. And that was a well-received Batman, of course, a reboot. And Nolan was trying to get as far away from the old Batmans as possible in the same way that Tim Burton tried to get away from the Adam West TV series. He reinvented Batman. And when I say reinvented, obviously they're basing a lot of the stuff off comics and what have you, but Tim Burton put his own spin on it. Now with Christopher Nolan, he wanted to move away from the cartoonish, campy type Batman, and he wanted to bring it into the real world, and make it more visceral, more relatable in the modern zeitgeist. And he really hit a home run with the sequel, because obviously Batman Begins was the first film, and Christian Bale was a good choice as Batman, and the main villain in that was Ra's al Ghul, played by Liam Neeson, and that was a good film. But the home run was really The Dark Knight. That is, for me, still the best Batman that's ever been made, was The Dark Knight, and I'll come on to the reasons why a little bit later on. But the reason that The Dark Knight was so great wasn't just Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, and he's by far the best villain that's ever been in any Batman film, and arguably perhaps the best villain that's ever been in a comic book film or a superhero film, full stop. It's arguable. But for me, he is definitely my favorite. And one of the things that made that film so good, it was very well written, great one-liners all the way through from the Joker, and, good action sequences. And the film just had a very, very good flow. It just flowed very well from one scene to the next. And there was never a moment in The Dark Knight where you were looking at your watch board in the cinema. No, it just flowed from one scene to the next. It always kept you captivated. Very well directed, as most Chris Nolan films are. He's a very, very good director. And I think for me, the only director who is really worth watching these days in Hollywood, for my money. Chris Nolan added this kind of edgy layer of reality in The Dark Knight by having the Joker kidnap people and then film him about, basically executing them. And that, of course, was drawing inspiration from real world events that were taking place around that time, where people were being held hostage and having their throats slit on camera all over the internet and stuff like that. So that was quite a bold thing for him to do. Do you know what I mean? Because that kind of stuff was still being shown on the internet. But again, that helped it draw you in more and make it feel more real world and more visceral. So fantastic film, The Dark Knight. The follow-up, which was called The Dark Knight Rises, was still a good film, but it didn't flow quite as well. And even though Tom Hardy was good as Bane, and I think his performance gets better with age, it still wasn't Heath Ledger as the Joker. That's just such a legendary performance. It's going to be perhaps impossible to top it. So that's some context for you in terms of my background as somebody that's watched Batman films and consumed Batman stuff over the years. Like I say, the old cassette tapes back in the 1980s that were like audio comics and stuff, and the TV series and the Tim Burton films and the Schumacher films and the Chris Nolan trilogy. That's the background, that's the context going into this new film starring Robert Pattinson. Now, I'd heard a lot of good things. There were several people in my Element group telling me that this is better than The Dark Knight, saying that this is an incredible film and it's got much better cinematography and it's just much more, I guess, close to the comic books or what Batman is supposed to be, etc., etc. Well, full disclosure, I'm not a comic book guy, so I don't care about the comic books. Okay, if you care about the comic books, that's cool, that's your thing. I don't really care about the comic books. I just watch the movies, right? So going in, people were saying a lot of good things about it, getting rave reviews and so on. I went to go watch it, and let me just tell you the things I really liked about this film. First of all, as people were telling me in my Element group, the cinematography is fantastic in this film. You can make a very, very strong case that it's better than the cinematography in the Nolan films. It's very artistic. The Nolan cinematography is good, but it's not in love with itself good. Whereas the cinematography in this film is really in love with itself. It's really a director trying to paint beautiful pictures with the camera. That's literally what he's doing. And the film is noir. It's a return to the dark, gritty Gotham City, because that's one of the criticisms that some people had of the Nolan films, is that Gotham didn't look like Gotham anymore. It just looked like a modern city. And of course, Gotham City is based on New York City. But again, that was the direction Nolan chose to go in because he wanted to draw people in. He wanted to modernize Batman and draw people back into the real world, by making it more real. And so he made it look like contemporary New York at the time. Around 2009 was when the Dark Knight came out. So in this new film starring Robert Pattinson, it's the old Gotham, very dark, very gritty, and it's impressive. The world they've created here. There's a scene, there's no spoilers here, but there's a scene very early on in the film where Batman comes out and attacks some, I guess, muggers or whatever they are. And they sense that, it's at a subway, and they look over and they sense that someone's coming, up the stairs. And the way they compose the shot, the entrance to the stairwell is absolutely pitch black. It's like blacker than black. And there's this like ominous music, and that something is going to come out of that darkness. So they make certain areas blacker than black, so that you feel like there's going to be a demon or something. Your imagination is running wild thinking, what's going to come out of that blackness? And then Batman emerges. This version of Batman is less reliant on gadgets than the previous iterations of Batman. He still has gadgets, but he's less reliant on gadgets. And it's more about his suit, which is like, I guess, metal plated or something. So he's almost like one of those old school knights, from the Middle Ages. And he's like clanking around in this really heavy suit and fighting guys in the street. It's more of a realistic Batman in that sense, in the sense that the combat is less over the top. Even though the combat wasn't crazy over the top in the Nolan Batmans, it's less over the top here. It's more, I guess, visceral combat. Cinematography is great. Don't really remember the score too tough. I'm pretty sure it was all right, but I don't really remember it like that. At least not on first watch. The visuals all very nice, and the gothic feel of Gotham and so on, all very good. So from a technical point of view, hard to fault the film. Now, as far as the performances, there was no bad performances for me, but there was no standout performances either. If I had to pick one person who I just liked more than anyone else in the film, it would be Gordon, the guy who plays the policeman that's working with Batman. He's a good actor. I forget the guy's name. Everybody else in the film, I mean, I guess the Penguin was all right. it's a different version of the Penguin because he was really like a 1990s mobster, Italian-American mobster, whereas the Penguin in the old Batman films was more like a mobster from the 50s or something, or the 20s, not even 50s, from the 20s. This version of the Penguin was like a mobster from the 90s or the mobster from the 80s, Italian-American mobster. And he was quite good. So nobody was bad, but there was no real standout performances for me. And so that's one of the things that disappointed me a bit, no standout performances. What did I think of Pattinson's Batman? Well, it's all a matter of taste. But if I was to describe Pattinson's Batman, this is the first emo Batman that has been in the franchise, complete with the black eyeliner. This is an emo Batman, bro. That's what it is. He's like this tragic loner, haunted by the past and all this kind of thing. As Bruce Wayne, I mean, he's just a recluse. There's really no difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman in this film. Whereas in the Nolan films and even in the Tim Burton films, there's a difference. Yeah, but with this Batman, he's the same guy. Whether he's in a suit or whether he's in his role as Bruce Wayne, it's the same thing. He's just like this tragic emo, depressed loner. And then he meets Catwoman, who's also got a tragic loner emo backstory. I'm just not into that emo stuff, bro. Like, I couldn't relate to this tragic loner Batman, depressed Batman. I just couldn't relate to it. If you can relate to it, it's all good. But for me personally, it was just there. I'm not saying his performance was bad, Pattinson necessarily, but it didn't do anything for me. That's all I can tell you. And Andy Serkis as Alfred, he was nothing special either. I much preferred Michael Caine as Alfred in the Nolan Batmans. This Alfred was just, he was like a well, I guess Michael Caine's a Cockney, but this guy's Cockney accent was stronger. Andy Serkis's Cockney was stronger than Michael Caine's Alfred in the Nolan trilogy. The film was too long for me. It dragged and dragged and dragged and dragged. And some people like the detective element because there's a lot of detective work in this Batman as opposed to the Nolan Batman where he just turns up and starts beating people up. There isn't much detective work. I didn't find the detective stuff particularly interesting, to be honest. And again, maybe it's just my own personal taste. And I do like film noir. I do like a good whodunit and detective story. I like that kind of thing. So, for example, I like The Usual Suspects. Love that film. Director's a very off-key, terrible guy, but the actual film, great. And that's kind of a noir whodunit with Kaiser Soze, Kevin Spacey, and all that kind of thing. And, I like Sin City. If you could you call that noir? I guess it's noir, but it's also comic booky and whatever. Zack Snyder. And, there's a number of other films out there that I could name if I rack my brain for long enough in terms of a whodunit, film noir, detective, all that kind of thing. Even Zodiac, that was based on a true story. I quite like Zodiac. A movie which isn't particularly highly rated, starring Denzel Washington, The Bone Collector. I like that film. So I like them kind of detective films. But this Batman right here with Pattinson, I wasn't particularly drawn into all the detective stuff that they were doing. The film didn't really captivate me like that. As visually impressive as it was, and I like the gritty, dark aesthetic of Gotham and the world they created, the performances just did not do it for me. And to top it all off, there was a moment of just completely unnecessary wokery in this film. Those of you who have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There was one line that Catwoman came out with and you were like, oh my God. I was worried that this would be woke because every film that comes out these days, they're trying to shoehorn loads of wokery into it. I thought maybe they had gotten through a whole blockbuster film without putting any overt wokery, but then they had to drop that line. It was like, oh my God. They can't help themselves, these people. But I guess you got an emo Batman. What do you expect? Emo Batman who's all sensitive for Catwoman. Oh dear. So overall, what can I say about Batman? It's not a bad film. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a bad film. There's a lot of good things about it, particularly from a technical point of view, the cinematography, the aesthetics, and so on. The performances aren't bad, but they're not anything special. There's nothing here. Even the writing. In fact, I should talk about the writing. The writing's quite poor. You don't have the memorable one-liners and so on that you had in the Nolan Batman, the Nolan films. And it's not just one-liners, because that's just, that can be gimmicky. Arnold Schwarzenegger films have got one-liners. It doesn't make the films great. But in the Nolan Batman films, there was a lot of social commentary in there. The Joker was talking about the nature of society and how this civilization is just a facade. It's just, and underneath that, there's actually savagery lurking in the hearts of most people. And of course, in the Nolan films, that gets disproved and all that kind of stuff. But in real life, I think the Joker was actually bang on, judging by what I've seen in my life, certainly over the past 2 years. The Joker was bang on. Beneath the veil of civilization, civilized society is actually savagery and darkness. It wouldn't take much. I mean, if a meteor hit the earth and transported all of us back to the medieval times, you would see absolute horror, the worst kind of atrocities possible within days. That's what human beings would be doing to each other. Like I say, the Joker in the Nolan Batman, he was talking about all that kind of stuff. And that's why he set up that situation with a boat at the end of the film, where one boat contained convicts and the other boat contained normal civilians. And are they going to blow each other up to save their own behinds and so on? So there was a lot of social commentary there going on. It was quite interesting. With this version of Batman, was there social commentary? Perhaps, but maybe it was social commentary I don't care about. I'm not really into all the tragic emo stuff. It's like with the Joker. I didn't like that film. A lot of people loved it. But to me, it was just a character I could not relate to. He was mentally ill, psychotic, a sad loner, outcast from society who had psychotic delusions and hallucinations and all this kind of stuff. I was like, man, this guy needs to be, obviously in the Batman lore, the Joker does end up in Arkham Asylum. And I'm thinking, this guy really does need to be in the asylum. It's such a unlikable, annoying figure, this mentally ill with an awful laugh. His laugh was like nails down a blackboard. And I'm sure some people are going to say, well, you missed the whole point. He's supposed to be a tragic figure and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you just take it as a standalone movie, never mind. I don't, you see, you have to understand, I don't care about the lore. Yeah. I don't care about all that Batman lore in the comics. I don't care about all that. I'm just a cinema goer. I want to see a good film. And the Joker, again, wasn't a bad film per se. I just found the lead character to be extremely annoying. Extremely annoying, not relatable at all, not likable, not like the Heath Ledger Batman, who was just a bizarre, funny, mysterious, contradictory character that you wanted to know more about. Whereas Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was just this sad, pathetic. No. The only part of that film that I really enjoyed was the scene with a dwarf in his the scene with a dwarf in his apartment. That was funny. That was actually a funny scene with a dwarf in his apartment. But other than that, I wouldn't want to watch that film again. So maybe these kind of films with a tragic, emo, mentally ill characters and stuff like that appeal to a new generation. I don't know. But for me, it's not my thing. I'm not going to give any star rating or anything for this film. It just is what it is. I've described it the way I saw it. If it sounds like your kind of thing and you haven't seen it already, go ahead and watch it. I'm sure you'll love it. But if you're someone like me that really enjoyed the Nolan trilogy and you're not really into like tragic emo type characters, then you might want to wait until this comes out on television or whatever, rather than spending money to go see it at the cinema. So anyway, that's my review for the Batman starring Robert Pattinson. And, I've seen Pattinson in a couple films before. One of them was Tenet. I saw him in that. And he was, decent in that. And I also saw him in one of the Harry Potter films. Oh, yeah, I've seen some of the Harry Potter films, folks. That is my, dirty little secret. I do have younger siblings, so I did watch Harry Potter too. And he was in one of the Harry Potter films. But I think he was most famous, Pattinson, from those chick vampire movies. The one that the chicks and the soy boys watch. I forget what they're called. And that's another tragic, like emo kind of thing in it with the vampires. So I guess that's why he got cast for this, maybe, because he's done that kind of tragic emo black eyeliner thing before. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about this new Batman film. Maybe you liked it a lot more than me. Again, there's a lot to like about it, but at the end of the day, it's like personal preference. So that's my take on it. I'm out.